Warning: viewer discretion is advised. Hi friends, welcome to Meals To Unalive For, where we talk about a true crime case and I make a meal from scratch. I'm your host Jody Breton, and if you enjoy this episode, please like and subscribe. Today we're talking about a man who said that he murdered people to keep earthquakes from happening, and no, that's not an exaggeration. So this man's name is Herbert Mullin. Herbert, or Herb, was born April 18th, 1947 in Salinas, California. His parents were Martin Bill Mullin and Jean Mullin. He also had an older sister named Patricia. Herb said that he grew up in a religious Catholic household, but said that they were strict, but he didn't have a bad childhood. His parents were stern but not abusive, and overall, it was a very happy time, which is honestly pretty unusual when we're talking about true crime. 99% of the killers that we talk about have a rough childhood or have some major trauma going on in their early life. So this was really interesting to me. In 1963, the family moved to the Santa Cruz area in his aunt and uncle's cabin in Boulder Creek, California. The Mullins found a home in Felton. Herb was enrolled at the San Lorenzo Valley High School. It was said that he had a lot of friends, played football, had a steady girlfriend, and was voted most likely to succeed. All of that would come crashing down the summer after graduation in 1965. A close friend of Herb's named Dean Richardson was killed in a car crash. This was thought to be the trigger of Herb's deteriorating sanity. After Dean's death, he built a shrine to Dean in his room and became obsessed with reincarnation, religion, and natural disasters. He also started dabbling in drugs like acid. His behavior started to scare friends and family, and he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. Later that same year, he attends Cabrillo College in Aptos studying engineering. And during all of this, he had a longtime girlfriend named Loretta, but they break up for 6 months in 1966. During this time, he also starts experimenting with LSD. January 1967, he gets back together with Loretta and they get engaged. Keep in mind, during this time, Herb is slowly declining mentally and has been admitted to 5 different mental hospitals. He graduated with a degree in engineering, then enrolled at San Jose State College. While attending San Jose College, he becomes active against the war in Vietnam and vowed to become a conscientious objector. He changed his major to philosophy and took on more of a hippie lifestyle. And for those that don't know what a conscientious objector is, I also had to look it up. It's someone who refuses to be part of the military, typically for religious reasons, but it doesn't have to be. Or if they are in the military, it's a non combat role because they don't believe in the violence. Later in 1967, he dropped out of college. Early in 1968, Herb would have his first sexual experience with a man, and soon after, he broke off his engagement to Loretta. He starts becoming violent and claimed that he was bisexual. April 1968, he's arrested for the possession of marijuana. He pleads to a lesser offense and was sentenced to probation. He then gets a job at Goodwill Industries, where he managed one of the organization's many stores in San Luis Obispo. October 1968, he was granted his conscientious objector status because remember, he just vowed to do it and then filed later. And his status was granted when his father wrote a letter to the draft saying how peaceful minded Herb was currently. The Selective Service Board credited his time employed by Goodwill Industries towards his required alternative services. So basically, he avoided the draft. February 1969, he quits his job and tells everybody that he knows that he's going to India to study yoga, but instead he moves to Sebastopol, California, and lives in a trailer on a ranch owned by his sister and her husband, Albert Boca. Around the same time at a family dinner, he starts imitating his brother in law's every move, which is known as echopraxia. And it's an indication of schizophrenia, but it's not super common. He commits himself at Mendocino State Hospital, where he stayed for 6 weeks and was again diagnosed as having schizophrenia aggravated by drug abuse. He was treated with antipsychotic medication. May of that same year, he checks himself out of the hospital. He was very uncooperative with the treatment program, and his prognosis was labeled as poor. Soon after he was released, him and another just released patient go to Lake Tahoe, and he finds a job as a dishwasher at a gambling resort called Harvey's Wagon Wheel. This lasted maybe a couple months though, because he quit his job and moved back home after he pulled a knife on a forest ranger who asked him to leave the park. But he didn't stab him. He was taken to the county jail but wasn't booked. Later that same year, he began treatment as a resident of the Community Drug Abuse Prevention Center in Santa Cruz. His behavior is ramping up at this point. He also starts beginning to ritualistically burn his penis with a lit cigarette. He moves out of the drug center and applied for welfare. He went to visit his old manager at the Goodwill store. Herb told him that he was hearing voices and receiving messages. In addition, he made some advances towards his friend, who called his uncle, who was a physician, and recognized the signs of schizophrenia, and the sheriff had committed him. Herb was committed to the psychiatric ward of San Luis Obispo County because it says on his file, as a result of mental disorder, he is a danger to others, a danger to himself, and gravely disabled. Shortly thereafter, he sent a letter to his parents saying that he had been forcibly committed to the psychiatric ward of San Luis Obispo. He asked them to write whatever they could. He was treated for 8 weeks by a psychiatrist, Joseph Middleton, who diagnosed him again as paranoid schizophrenic. His parents did drive down to visit Herb at the psychiatric ward, and it was then that Herb told them that he was bisexual. I'm not sure how that conversation went. It was just something that was mentioned, so I don't know if they were accepting of it, if they weren't. I know that they are very Catholic, so I'm not sure how well that went down. A few weeks after that, he was discharged with the prognosis listed as grave. Contingent on his discharge, he had to attend the Santa Cruz Mental Health Clinic, and he did visit the clinic intermittently, but rarely attended group therapy sessions. He was also very careless about taking his medication. However, he did get a job as a dishwasher at the Holiday Inn. March of 1970, he moved out of the house and moved into a cheap hotel paid for with his welfare checks. He was introduced to a commune in Santa Cruz and he wanted to move to the commune, but his strange behavior made the residents nervous. So basically, he wanted to move to this commune and they were like, "No, you're acting really erratic and really strange. We don't want you to come with us." But one of the people who lived there was named Pat Brown, and they were a friend of Herb's that introduced him to the commune. So in 1970 of that summer, Herb and Pat Brown go to Hawaii together, and Pat abandons Herb at this time, and he admitted himself to a mental health clinic in Maui. I have no idea what happened during this trip. It just says that Pat abandoned him. So I don't know if he was acting erratic, if they got into a fight, what happened. That's all I know about it. But he was left in Maui. And so he goes to the mental health clinic. And again, he's examined by a psychiatrist and diagnosed with schizophrenia. By July, he was discharged as improved and wrote home for money so that way he could get back home. Almost immediately after he gets back from Hawaii, police arrest him for being under the influence of drugs, and while in jail, deprived of his medication, he becomes hyperactive and sang loudly. He was committed as an emergency case to the county hospital psychiatric ward. The charges were dropped, and the hospital had to release Herb under the California law that limits holding involuntarily mental patients past 72 hours. So they couldn't keep him longer than the 72 hours, and even though he really wasn't okay. August of 1970, he applied for Cabrillo College to study psychology, but he failed to keep his counseling appointments. He would make an appointment and then not show up for them. He blamed his parents for his illness and changed his life insurance policy so that UNICEF would be the beneficiary. And he did get a job driving a truck for Goodwill Industries again, and he ended up having a affair with a man. Over the course of the rest of 1970 and early 1971, he goes through a series of fads, which he kind of already does that, like when he said that he was going to move to India and become a yoga instructor and, all of these different things, or live on a commune. But this time he shaves his head, he went on a microbiotic diet, he lost weight, he wears a big black sombrero and faked a Mexican accent. No, I'm not making that up, but he tries to reinvent himself over and over again, and it just doesn't seem to work no matter what he tries. March 1971, he spent 10 days in jail for public intoxication and resisting an officer. The drunken public charges were dismissed. A few months later, he moved to San Francisco, where he lived in some really decrepit apartments among a lot of addicts and other mental patients. There, he met a new friend, Alan Hansen, who confirmed his beliefs on reincarnation and began to believe that his voices were really telepathy, indicating that he was chosen by God to do something special. He also became fascinated with art and read many books on Leonardo da Vinci. While in the library, Herb was researching Einstein and found that he was born on the anniversary of Einstein's death. He believed that this was no coincidence and he was destined for some special work, as he said. So, this guy, Alan, is basically feeling the fire. He's confirming what Herb believes, which is really dangerous, right? Because the voices that he's hearing are violent and it's not a good thing. So, this is a really bad place for him to be, essentially. He also believed that he had something to do with the natural disasters that happened. So, California is notorious for earthquakes. He was born on the great 1906 earthquake anniversary. So, he thought that that was special in some way. Later that year in 1971, Herb begins to work out at the Newman Herman gym and starts doing amateur boxing, and he starts training so eventually he can enter some tournaments. But when he does enter the tournaments, he is so violent, he won't stop assaulting his opponent, and trainers keep having to pull him away. So I'm not sure if he was kicked out, but he was pretty bad. September of 1972, he moves back in with his parents and he stops taking his medication altogether, and his anger towards his father grows. The voice commanded him to start killing people. In addition, a major earthquake was predicted to devastate California soon. So, the reason why Herb said that he was killing to prevent natural disasters, specifically the earthquakes, is he felt like if he killed people, it would keep natural disasters from happening, sort of like a human sacrifice. So, he had said that when Vietnam happened, that was enough sacrifices to keep natural disasters from happening for a long time, but he said that it was no longer enough because the war was subsiding and he needed to start killing to keep natural disasters from happening. So, in his head, he thinks that he's helping people by sacrificing these few so that this natural disaster won't hurt other people. So, just to give you an idea of what he's thinking during an interview, they asked, "But if a murder is a natural disaster, then why should you be locked up for it if it's natural and has a good effect?" His answer was, "Your laws. You see, the thing is, people get together, say in the White House. People like to sing the die song. If I am president of my class when I graduate from high school, I can tell two, possibly three young Homo sapiens to die. I can sing that song to them and they'll have to kill themselves or be killed. An automobile accident, a knifing, a gunshot wound. You ask me why this is. And I say, well, they have to do that in order to protect the ground from an earthquake because all of the other people in the community, because all the other people in the community have been dying all year long. In my class, we have to chip in, so to speak, to the darkness. We have to die also. And people would rather sing the die song than murder. And when they asked, "What is the die song?" and he said, "Just that. I'm telling you to die. I'm telling you to kill yourself or be killed so that my continent will not fall off into the ocean. See, it's all based off reincarnation. This die is to protect my strata." So, if that gives you any idea of his mental state at the time, this is what we're working with. On October 13th, 1972, Herb says that he received a telepathic message from his father saying that he needed to kill someone, and he does. He passed a transient, Lawrence White, also known as Whitey, walking alone along a windy road in the Santa Cruz Mountains. He stopped his car, pretending he had car trouble. When Whitey stopped to offer to help, Herb beat him to death with a baseball bat. He left the body at the side of the road. Herb would later claim that the victim was Jonah from the Bible and that he had sent Mullin a telepathic message saying, "Pick me and throw me over the boat. Kill me so that others will be saved." Only 11 days later, on October 24th, 1972, he picked up a young lady, Mary Guilfoyle, at Cabrillo College. She was a student and was running late for an interview. She hitched a ride with Herb, and he unfortunately stabbed her through the chest and back. He dissected her body and scattered her remains alongside a lonely road. Her body wasn't found until the following February. Herb said that the reason why he dissected Mary's body was, and I quote, "Michelangelo spent hours and hours secretly dissecting bodies so he could find out the form of the human body for his painting and sculpture and stuff. That's why his works are so much better than anyone else's. It gave him insight others didn't have." And he also said that his mom had given him the Michelangelo book, hoping that Herb would be inspired to use as art as an emotional outlet. And unfortunately, it inspired another murder, and he blamed her for this murder. He said that, and I quote, "I think she was trying to tell me what to do so I could have this insight too." November 2nd, which is All Souls Day, Herb would go to a Catholic church called St. Mary's in Los Gatos, California, and he said he originally went to give him strength to never kill again, but obviously that wasn't true because very shortly after he chooses to do otherwise. Herb thought the church was empty, but when he heard Father Henry Tomei in one of the booths, he decided, well, if you, the priest, are in here, I guess I should kill you. He tried to force the confessional door open. Tomei heard the commotion, opened the door to see what was going on. Herb attacked him with a hunting knife and stabbed him in the heart as he struggled. And he was trapped in the confines of the narrow confessional, so unfortunately, he was stuck. And a parishioner walked in, saw the struggle, screamed, and ran out. She got a glimpse of Herb, but didn't get a very good look at him, so she wasn't able to identify him. December 16th, 1972, he buys a gun after reading Einstein on Peace. He stated that he needed the gun because he was one-third Scandinavian. The book stated that in Switzerland, every adult male was in the military militia and kept a gun for protection. January 15th, 1973, he passes the physical and mental exam for the Marine Corps, but refused to sign a document to release his criminal record. He insisted that the charges should have been dropped. He was subsequently dismissed from the military. I have no idea how he passed the mental exams for the Marine Corps, but he did. Also, I want to mention that there was another prolific killer during this time. So, Santa Cruz was actually dubbed Murderville in that year because there were so many murders happening. And because Edmund Kemper was active, they couldn't really make sense of how many killers there were and what was connected. They actually thought that Mary's murder was connected to the other girls who had been hitchhiking. So, it was all very confusing, but obviously they did sort it out eventually. If you didn't see our episode on Edmund Kemper, we did cover him last week, so go check that episode out. So Herb decides that he's going to go after a man named Jim Guinera because Jim is originally the person who introduces Herb to drugs, essentially. So he blames Jim Guinera for how he is and how his life turned out. January 25th, 1973, Herb drove to a hidden away area on a muddy road near the Mystery Spot, which is a popular Santa Cruz tourist trap in the mountains. And he waited for Kathy Francis to come to the door of this small wooden shack she shared with her husband, Bob, who at the time was in Berkeley closing a drug deal. And it was just Kathy and her two children, 9-year-old David and 4-year-old Damon. When Herb asked to speak with Jim, Kathy told him that Jim and his wife Joan moved to Western Avenue in town. Mullen thanked her and left, but he would be back. So he goes to the Guinera's new residence and they let him in because they know him. And Herb randomly cries, "You're claptrapping me," and shot Jim as he tried to escape. Wounded, he dragged himself upstairs where he was trying to save his wife, and he was too late. His wife was taking a bath. Herb followed him up there, shot him and his wife in the head. And then after they had already passed, he stabbed them with a hunting knife, and it was definitely overkill. The Guineras would be discovered later that day by Joan's mother, who was babysitting their daughter. Now, right after this, Herb decides to go back to the home of Kathy Francis, and in his mind, he knew that they were possible witnesses. So he goes back and he parks his station wagon down the road so it wouldn't get stuck in the mud, and then just knocks the cabin door open and opened fire. He shot Kathy in the chest and head and killed the two boys as they played Chinese checkers on their bunk bed. In a rage, the same as the other two, he stabs them after they were already dead and just completely overkills the situation. The massacre looked like a drug issue at the time to local authorities. Both Bob Francis and Jim Guinera were known drug dealers. After Bob Francis was found and cleared as a suspect, the police asked him to come up with any suspects. Bob produced a long list of dealers, rivals, and other misfits, but Herb Mullin was not on that list. In fact, the last that Jim Guinera had seen of Mullin was the summer of 71, so a couple years earlier, when Herb did some acid during a visit. A few months later, Herb sent Guinera a weird letter asking him who he was going to vote for in the upcoming November elections. Bob Francis and Jim Guinera laughed about it and really didn't think much about Herb after that, so he wasn't even remotely a suspect at this point. Less than a couple weeks later, on February 6, 1973, he came across four teenage campers. While engaged in conversation, he asked them to leave the premises. He told them that they were polluting the forest. Herb claimed that he asked them telepathically if he could kill them, and they all said yes. He then took out his gun and shot them all and left their bodies in the tents. After he was finished shooting all of the boys while they were in the tent, he took their rifle and $20 that they had between them. Their bodies would be found by one of the victims' brothers about a week later. On February 13th, 1973, Herb would take his final victim. Retired prizefighter Fred Perez was working his driveway when Herb pulled up and shot him in the chest. However, Fred's neighbor Joan Stagnero heard the shot and saw the license plate and was able to call the police. That same day, he was pulled over and arrested but remained silent and did not resist. After searching his apartment, police found a Bible, an address book with Guinera's address listed, newspaper articles, and his recent murders, and a rosary pouch that belonged to Father Tome. One interesting thing is that when police evaluated Mullin, he had some really weird tattoos. Like on his belly, he had the quote, legalized acid and eagle eyes marijuana. Other tattoos read birth or Mahasamadhi and Kirya yoga. So some really strange tattoos and quotes all over his body. Police also started performing ballistic tests, and that's how they realized that he was the killer of the Francis family and the Guinera family. So it was all starting to come together. Herbert Mullin would be charged with 10 counts of murder. However, he was not charged with the murder of Whitey, Guilfoyle, and Tomei. He attempted to plead guilty to all 10 counts of murder. However, he was not found competent to represent himself. However, he was deemed legally sane on all 10 counts. He would be convicted of all 10 counts of murder. He was found guilty of 2 counts of first degree murder and 8 counts of second degree murder and received a life sentence and would be eligible for parole in 2020. So while Herbert was in custody, he did share a cell next to Edmund Kemper, which, as you know, is the co ed killer. And we covered him last week. And so this is what Edmund Kemper had to say about him. He said, well, Mullen had a habit of singing and bothering people when somebody tried to watch TV. So I threw water on him to shut him up. Then, when he was a good boy, I'd give him some peanuts. Herbie liked peanuts. That was effective because pretty soon he asked permission to sing. That's called behavior modification. He also called Mullen a creep with no class and offered to rat on Mullen if he heard him say anything incriminating. In return, Mullen was also disgusted by Kemper complaining constantly about the noise when he was trying to meditate. Both Mullen and Kemper viewed their own killing rampages as missions and that the other one was a heathen. Mullen killed to save the world from earthquakes and despised Kemper as a brutish sex maniac. In turn, Kemper said that Mullen was just a cold-blooded killer, killing everyone he saw for no good reason. So, as you can see, they were both delusional, and there's really no good reason for any of the deaths that they had collectively, but they both felt that they were better than the other. Herbert Mullin would stay in prison. He did apply for parole multiple times, saying that he was reformed and he was no longer a danger to society, but that was never granted. He did pass away in Stockton on August 18th, 2022, from natural causes. For this meal, I decided to go with a goat cheese and mushroom crostini, herb crusted pork tenderloin with applesauce, roasted potatoes, and a caramel apple cheesecake. Everything was pretty good, but I particularly liked the mushroom crostini and the cheesecake. So let me know down in the comments what you thought about this episode, and I will see you guys next week. Thanks. Bye.